Hello, lovely writers, and welcome to this week's Writerly Wednesday. This week we're talking about a subject that feels very vulnerable, and this is directly in response to an email that I had about this problem that I know many writers struggle with. So if you have ever felt very alone as a writer, I want you to stay tuned and see what I have as far as advice for you. Now, if you are new here, I would love it if you would hit subscribe, hit the like button if you like the advice that I give today. But for now, let's just dive right in. So the writer was sharing with me this feeling, especially when we get over, say, 30, but this can happen anytime before then. We've got this dream of writing. Perhaps we've set up some really good systems around our writing, and then life gets in the way. That's number one. Number two, what happens when we don't feel as if we have anyone to share these writerly concerns with, right? It's very lonely. Nobody is sitting there with you while you're writing. It is a very common experience, and it needn't hurt you. In fact, being able to share some of that vulnerability is incredibly important, because if you've been around a while, you will know that I am constantly encouraging you to write right up to that feeling of vulnerability. That vulnerability, that being courageous is everything for your writing. It's what readers are looking to connect with. It's what I'm looking to connect with. So here's my advice. Number one, if you can, please try to make friends with your internal editor. Now, believe it or not, that internal editor is also related to that inner mean girl or inner mean voice, super ego, whatever you want to call it. And oftentimes we can have a very adversarial sort of relationship with that voice. My recommendation always is try to have a conversation, if you will, with that voice and see if you can't get on the same page, at least a little bit. She is there for your best interest. Oftentimes, when you hear those critical words, it can feel as if she doesn't want what you want. But the truth is she does. She's just very afraid. And so making friends with that voice can be a real pivot for you and your writing. That's the internal. I want to look at too the practical, which is especially if you haven't reached out and found a writerly cohort that feels good, do some research. You may have to try a few on. I am the first to admit that every writers group that you see is not necessarily going to be a good fit for you, and it is absolutely fine to try them out. Go with your gut as well. If you don't have a good feeling, you don't have to stick around. This isn't an assigned classroom like when you're at school. It's okay to try different ones. It can be really hard to make friends as adults, and I want to say, as somebody who's moved quite a lot, I've been through that process. I get it. And if we don't manage to find different ways, maybe it's an online group, maybe it's a group of people at a local library, find different ways that feel slightly accessible to you to go and make connections with people who you feel you might have something in common with. And slowly get yourself to that place where you can share some of your vulnerabilities. I'm thinking about places where you might have these conversations where you hear that other people have those same issues that you do, or at least similar, if not exactly the same. Finding that writerly cohort is really important. But the biggest step, honestly, isn't just to sit and let other people be vulnerable. It is building yourself up to the place where you can share something. It's okay to just share a little bit of something vulnerable and then share more and more. Get a feel for how those people in that group support you. If you don't feel supported, it's okay to leave. But if you do feel supported, then maybe share a little bit more. We can't get anywhere if we are not brave enough to take a little tiny step. Because of course, if we're putting on a great facade, everything's going great. My writing is going great, or I would be doing my writing, but I'm just too busy. That may be true, but if it's not true and it's what you're saying to keep yourself protected, I have a beautiful friend who always says protection prevents connection. And that's true no matter if you're talking about romantic relationships or talking about platonic relationships or writerly relationships. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable will get you the result you want. But if you're waiting, I don't know, for somebody to come and be very vulnerable with you and you won't do it yet, they're looking for the same thing, right? A little quid pro quo where you're being a little vulnerable and then they can be a little bit vulnerable. And I'm not gonna say it's easy, but that is the way we need to do it. So that was my second piece of advice. Try to find a group, and it doesn't have to be with people that you've talked with before, but give lots of different things a little try and see how you go. Or maybe, as a writer, maybe just joining a book club and seeing, hey, does anybody else write here? Do you ever write your own stories? See if you can't find your cohort that way. And then a last bit of advice, and you may do this in conjunction with that second one, is if it feels like it's taking too long and you're feeling so stuck in your head. By the way, every writer I know, and including myself, can often stay stuck in their head, and if you are only in that echo chamber of your own self-talk, it can be really difficult. So number one, you can get counseling support. You don't have to have massive problems in your life. You can see a life coach, but even more so, I'd recommend going out and finding a talk therapist. Even if you use that time just to get everything out and have another warm body listening to you, that can be very much worth it. Another way to go, especially as a writer, would be to set up a pen pal relationship, either with a real person or with a character. You can create that person and you can start to practice being vulnerable in letters to and maybe even from that person. This not only helps you to increase your craft, i.e. every bit of writing is helping you along your path to being a writer, but jumping into another character's head, your pen pal, and then jumping back into your life can be a wonderful way of expressing your creativity. And who knows, they could become a character in your story. But that might be a slightly left of center way of looking at creating connection and being vulnerable in a way that doesn't feel too vulnerable, right? It's okay to take mini steps. I hope some of this advice helps you, whether you were the person that wrote the email or you're another writer out there that feels like you are all alone. I don't know a successful writer who is absolutely on their own. They have built, whether on accident or intentionally, a group of other people around them that give them the support that they need to continue to challenge themselves. I also don't know a single successful writer or working writer who doesn't struggle with doubt, self-doubt, and the only way around it are these small actions that we can take. It's okay to start where you're at, but try to grow that willingness to be vulnerable. That's going to help you in your writing, because that's what we want from writing as well. That's it for today. I really do hope it was helpful. If you've got any advice for the person that wrote this email to me about how to feel connection, especially as an adult and especially as a writer, if you don't feel like you've got the people in place around you at the moment, I would love to hear your advice. What's worked for you? Until next time, I hope you do have a beautiful writerly week, and we'll talk again soon. Bye, writers.